Hello everybody and welcome. Today, I just want to talk about writing. There's a quote that says, writing is one of those things that's hardest for a writer. It's so cliche and it's so cringy, but it's also true. I personally like to challenge myself. I have this idea or goal that I'm going to try and write in every single genre. So whatever requires writing, creative writing to some extent, I want to be involved in at some point in time. And when I say that, I do also acknowledge that some things might not be for me. Some things I might try and not like, but I still want to try. I still want to try, improve, and test the waters, see if I do like something. And if I don't, I'll just write the story or write whatever it is and move on. I say that, but I also know that I get very attached to my writing. It's hard for me to imagine that I write something and then just leave it abandoned. But if that were to happen, I believe I would at least turn it into something else. There are story ideas I've had that turned into a totally different genre. But what I've been thinking about lately, earlier this year, I was working on a story that's kind of sci-fi. I wrote it, I finished it, and what I like to do is I like to write, and then once it's done, I kind of abandon it. I leave it alone. I leave it in quarantine. I try not to think about it. It'll be in my mind from time to time, but I like to just kind of walk away and move on to the next thing. And now, once I finished that story, I went back to the story I wrote for NaNoWriMo, which was... But if you recall that video, I kind of said something to the effect of, I'm not gonna publish this, I'm not gonna work on it, I'm just gonna leave it. And yet, after I finished the sci-fi story, I just sat with myself for a moment to think about, what do we want to work on right now? It was a toss-up between starting a completely new thing or editing some of my previous work. And it came down to editing this NaNoWriMo story. And editing. The thing about editing, especially the first edits, it always ends up being a rewrite. Maybe it's just me, but it always ends up being just writing all over again. Me realizing that the story is all over the place, things are missing, or certain things need to be removed completely and put back together in different ways. But I think that's because my process for writing is I don't do a detailed map of what I'm writing. I tend to have my tea said, drink me. It tends to be an overall, I have an idea that excites me, and then I come up with a beginning and an end. And I try to have at least what I view as the major elements of a story, and I go from there. So I try not to get too bogged down by the names or by, are they turning left over here? Are they turning right over there? I tend to do a lot of that while I'm writing. I'm probably explaining it poorly because it's been a while since I've plotted a story, so I might actually do more than that. But as far as I'm remembering from last year, my process has begun to be, have an idea, beginning and end, let it excite me, and have a general idea of how I would want to go from A to B. So now that I'm editing the NaNoWriMo story, I'm in this place of rewriting. And I think rewriting is harder than just writing. Sometimes writing and editing and rewriting can feel so frustrating, and it can feel like a labor. Not even a labor of love, a labor of pain, just pure pain. And it can feel like it's never ending and like it's never going to stop, and you're just constantly going to be going back over and over and over the story, this element, this little piece. You're like, something isn't right. And also sometimes you go back over and you're like, so why do I think I'm a writer? Who told me I can write? Who told me? Who lied to me? There were certain lines I reread in the story, and I was like, ma'am, who told you? Who told you you were a writer? But I also know that while writing, you have these moments that are pure bliss while you're writing them, and you're just flowing, and you can read back to it and be like, that was a line, it was amazing, like where did it come from? God planted it in my brain, and from my brain to my mouth, it just feels like it's God-given, and you're like, I am not a writer, I am the writer, so show some respect. But then there are some times in the writing process that we have to admit where it's not a flow, and you actually have to just force yourself to keep writing and force yourself to put something down. And I've made my peace with that. I've made my peace with the fact that there are times where I'm gonna have to just sit down and write something, and I will come back to it and improve it. The fact that I can look back at it and say, this is not it, means that I actually can write. And that moment, that spot just wasn't, I wasn't feeling it. And likely I had an idea in my mind at the time that has changed. The good thing is, while I hold my precious little darlings very close to me, I love my stories, I love my ideas. If anyone ever tried to take them or change them in any way, we're gonna have to fight. They're my babies. But I don't think I hold too close to how I write it. I'm perfectly fine with making cuts, and I'm perfectly fine with cutting up my baby. It's okay. But the writing process is just an interesting process. It's an emotional process that makes you doubt yourself, reflect on yourself, but also question why you do the things that you do. And I remember there was a time, the very first book that I wrote, it took me 3 years to write because I started it in high school and I didn't have a very good consistency streak. But by the time I was finishing high school, I started it like junior year of high school, and there were long gaps between writing. I got more consistent my senior year, and then I actually consistently would work on it while I was at my first semester of college, and it was a fun time. I would stay up late in the common room and hang out with the people who were coming back from the from the club, and I'd be there in my sweater typing away, and I finished it. Still proud of this. I finished it Christmas morning, probably like 5-6 a.m. in the morning. Yeah, during my break at home. That book, it's not published. It still means a lot to me. I haven't reread it in quite some time because I don't know, I think there's some trauma there. Maybe it's one of those things with writers and their first stories, but I haven't reread it in a while. But before, I had spent basically the entirety of college editing it, trying to make it better, improve on it. But it's one of those things where the time between high school and college, I was consistently changing. So the story kind of had to keep changing with me, if that makes any sense. Who I am and how I wanted the story to go and to be consistently was changing. So I'm probably going to go back over it maybe this year, maybe next year. I think I'm avoiding it. But I remember as I was finishing, while I was working on it, or in the height of editing it and revising, I think I was in my 5th revision. At one point, I laid on the ground like the crybaby I am, and I was like, I can't do this anymore. This is too much. It'll never stop. It'll never end. Thinking that I'm just always going to be working on this dang story. And I was ready. I so badly wanted to say, I quit, I give up, I surrender, I'm not writing anymore. Which would have been a waste of my English degree. But I couldn't say it. I couldn't say that I quit, because I also knew that this thing that was torturing me, I also loved it too much. I loved it too much to let it go. There were so many stories that I had already written out lines for, and so many story ideas that had already come to me that I was so excited to write. And I knew, look, this is my confidence, this is who I am, who I believe I am, and what I know about myself, but I knew no one else could write it like me. Even if my writing still had room to improve, I knew no one could write it like me. So I knew there were too many stories in me. There was too many things that I had to say, but also that I actually, even though I was hating the story, I also really loved it. So it was one of those moments of, I hate this. I want to quit. I want to leave. Leave me be. Set me free. But I laid on the floor and I acted like I was gonna quit. But in my heart of hearts, in the depths of my heart, it was like my heart was like, no, you won't. I'm like, I want to quit. And it was like, but you won't. But you won't. And in that moment, I knew I'm never gonna quit. Even if I never get published, even if no one sees these stories, I'm never gonna stop writing and revising and editing and trying my best. But yeah, that's been my journey with writing. And as I get older and I get more consistent and I find my own rhythm for editing and revising and all of these things, I start pushing out these stories quicker. My revision has gotten better, all thanks to that first story that I wrote that took me like 3 years to edit, and it's still not done. But my revision gets better. My ability to cut away what doesn't belong gets better. And I feel like I don't doubt my stories. I think there are some writers that doubt their stories, like, is this even good enough? I never doubt my stories or my ideas. Sometimes I side-eye my writing, like, you wrote this, I wrote this. But overall, I think for art in general, for musicians, for artists, and by art I mean like drawing, painting, and for writing and just creating, it's one of those things that the more you do something, the more you get into your flow and your rhythm, the less you doubt yourself and the less you feel like you're unworthy or like your craft doesn't matter or has no place. The more you find your place in the craft. I don't know. But yeah, I am currently editing one of many stories. I know last year I had finished and published a book. That's not gonna be the case for this year. I think this year we're going to focus mostly on writing and editing multiple stories. I don't know how many. So far we have completed 2, and we are on the revision of 1. And I think I'm just gonna see how many I can pop out for right now, which is usually a lot. I will give myself some kudos for that. While I said that I want to write in every genre, there's also a lady I learned about while I was getting my English degree who wrote like 10 books a year. I don't remember how many, but she wrote multiple books a year. I want to get on that level. I want to be at the Stephen King level, not the George R.R. Martin level where we're putting out a book every 5 years. I want to be on the multiple books a year, but they won't be all the same genre because I just write whatever is in my head, which is a genre mess. Anyway, yeah, I just wanted to talk about writing. If there are any writers out there, let me know what you are working on or what books inspired you to start writing. If you're not a writer, what's your art style? What do you like to create? What has been your flow and rhythm that's kept you going? All right, I'm gonna go drink my tea. Goodbye.